welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. I am Kim King, and I'm here with Heather. Heather, thanks for being here today.
I'm excited to be here, Kim, and really I'm excited about what our topic is today because I know it's something I've talked about many times. I know you have too, and that really is the question, is adoption right for every person who wants to perhaps pursue adoption, be a parent? It's a real conversation. And I think probably in adoption, it's not necessarily something that gets talked enough about. Really understanding that adoption may not be right for everyone, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. And, is adoption right for you? But it could also be, is adoption right for you right now?
Right.
So some of these topics might kind of put you on a pause, a holding pattern when it comes to jumping right into adoption. You might need to take some time to work through a few things that we talk about today. But certainly, adoption does not always end up being the right decision and path for every couple.
Right. And I think, too, you might listen today and think, oh, wow, I've been in a holding pattern, but I'm more ready than I think. So
Mm-hmm.
it also might help you move forward in that journey, maybe take the next step, even if the next step is just learning more, because really we're going to try to, give you some tools to help evaluate where you might be. And, sometimes the most loving thing that we can do for ourselves and our future children is to pause and kind of do a quick, self check to make sure this is the right path we're on before we get started.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And when it comes to feeling a call to adoption and feeling compelled to adopt, it's okay if you didn't always feel that your whole life. If
Mm-hmm.
you weren't one of those little girls playing orphanage with your baby dolls or saying from the age of 8 years old, one day you'll adopt a child, if that's not you, it's okay. That doesn't mean adoption isn't right for you. It doesn't mean it is. It doesn't mean it isn't. But sometimes, especially couples who come to adoption unexpectedly, perhaps after loss, infertility, medical challenges that prevent them from conceiving or carrying a baby to term, they do ask themselves, is adoption right for me? Is
Mm-hmm.
that our next step? And how do we know when we're ready?
Mm-hmm.
So I really love this topic. I like that we're digging more into this and in a little more detail today.
Right, right. So, yeah, I mean, let's just start by putting it out there. Adoption isn't the right choice for everyone, and that's okay. I know, Kim, that we've both worked with different couples in the past. I know we both have stories about this, but who were amazing people. But through the process, through learning about the process, they realized that adoption just wasn't the right fit for them. And I worked with a couple early in my work life with adoption who were really probably, further than most people are down that journey of adoption. They were actively, being presented to expectant parents as a family who could be chosen. And they had a realization during that wait that this was not right for them. And it was a kind of a result of a number of things that occurred, a number of open and honest conversations that they probably should have had much earlier in the process that really caused them to do that self-reflection. And that's one of the things that I think is really important is that you have those tools so you can do this self-reflection before you are too far in, because adoption is, the same like parenting. It's a lifelong commitment. And if you are considering domestic open adoption, that lifelong commitment isn't just to the child you will adopt. It's to their story. It's to their birth parents, the birth family. It's a lifelong commitment. It's not one you can change your mind on right when things get rough or when you decide this was the wrong journey. And certainly, choosing not to adopt doesn't mean you're less compassionate or less capable of loving a child. It just means that it may not be the right choice for you. You know, another another story that comes to mind, Kim, is a couple that, oh gosh, I probably worked with very closely about 15 years ago. And the husband had been adopted and had a wonderful adoption experience, and really felt like he had been given a beautiful life through adoption and wanted to do the same for another child. And he and his wife had not been able to naturally conceive, and rather than pursue fertility treatments, they decided to pursue adoption. And again, they were very far in the journey. They were being presented to expectant mothers. They got chosen by an expectant mother. And I remember, I will never forget this day, took the call from the adoptive dad, and he was extremely emotional. And he went on to say that they were going to have to back out of the match because his wife had confided in him, finally, that she never really wanted to be a mom. She was just going along with his dream. And she realized this was his dream, not hers. And she could not make that lifelong commitment.
Mm.
So, again, this is why it's good to figure this out ahead of time, because once you are in the process, it can really be a much more difficult spot to realize, hey, I'm on the wrong path here.
And I think it's so important to do the work that it takes and give yourself that space and time and that put that investment into contemplation within yourself
Hmm.
to determine at the core of who I am, is this just not the path for me? Or is it that there's a lot of uncertainty? There are a lot of unknowns. It feels like I'm giving up control. It's not for me. My personality type doesn't fit with the adoption process itself. Is it more just lack of education, or is it truly at your core? It's just not your desire. It's more, we were going through the steps of life. That's the next natural step. Have a child. Can't have a child biologically. The next natural step is adoption. And it's kind of the tide of life is sucking you along without you giving pause to really do that deep contemplation.
Hmm. Absolutely. So let's jump into some maybe questions to ask yourself that can really help you evaluate, okay, am I ready to take this next step and move forward in adoption? And they may be questions not just for you inwardly, but for you and your spouse, your partner.
Mhm. And the first thing to think about is, have you given yourself time to heal from infertility or pregnancy loss? And Heather, this is something that as families jump into adoption immediately after a loss, their home study provider, their social worker, they actually say, we require you to go through counseling. We require you to have a 6-month period of time after a loss before actively pursuing adoption, because social workers know that when adoptive couples haven't, or adoptive parents who are single, haven't given themselves time to heal from infertility or pregnancy loss, that the adoption experience itself can trigger things that are unhealed, that have been
Mhm.
unaddressed in the path that brought them here in the first place. And I talked with Linda, a social worker that we know, that said this exact thing. She's seen couples that went through miscarriage and loss of a child, and when it came down to going through those steps at the hospital, they got matched, they were there, the baby is born, the wife just couldn't get through it because she had never taken the time to heal from
Mhm.
her previous experience.
Mhm. Absolutely. And it's important to understand that adopting a child is a, a complete different journey than a biological pregnancy. Yes, they both ideally end with parenting a child, becoming a mom or a
Mhm.
dad. but they're different, and the answer to pregnancy loss or infertility, the healing doesn't come from adopting a child. The healing has to be separate from
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that.
Yeah. Another good question to ask yourself is, are you ready to love and parent a child with the understanding that this family may not look like what you thought you look like? Now, that could be physically look like, because you may adopt a child who looks nothing like you. It may have more to do with a theoretical what your family looks like, knowing that, if you're adopting domestically, you may be keeping in touch with the birth family. You may have, that connection out there that, you know, we talk a lot about open adoption is not co-parenting, but it is open adoption. There is still a connection there. A child really should grow up knowing who their birth parents are. And if you're adopting, you know, internationally, or if you're adopting a waiting child here in the US, that means your family is not going to look like a family with a newborn. You're bringing an older child into your home and family. So, just really good to spend some time realizing that what you might have in your mind's eye about welcoming a child into your family is probably going to look different when you're pursuing that through adoption.
And that when you come into the world of adoption, if you can surrender that vision of what you thought the picture of your family would look like, your opportunities broaden immensely, such as in race. Maybe you adopt a newborn or a 2 or 3 month old or a 6 month old. Maybe you always thought you'll definitely have a baby girl, but in adoption, you are totally open to boy or girl. Um, Adoptive parents often have grown up their whole lives, and everyone naturally, with this vision, right, of what your family will look like. And sometimes one spouse will need more time than the other to process that it could be different.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
look at it what I'm trying to get at is sometimes this vision locks you into a very tiny box when you get into adoption. And that can be, but not always is, can be a symptom that you have not addressed that adoption means our family may look different. Our experience may be different from what we grew up always expecting, right?
Hmm.
When you married your spouse, you thought your baby will look like a combination of the two of you. But in adoption, anything's possible. The child might not even share your same race, right?
Right. Right.
So it's important to come to terms with and grieve the loss of that expectation,
Right.
right?
I worked with a family many years ago who this was their struggle. They, as they sat and talked to me about it, they thought the struggle was just that they weren't on the same page, that the wife was done with, they'd been doing fertility treatments, and she was feeling the weight of this kind of 28-day get your hope up and then fail when your period comes. She was getting this, just exhausted from this, what she felt was continual failure month after
Hmm.
month. And they were, their fertility challenge was male factor infertility. So, that was where they were trying. And the husband, so she was ready. She was ready to move on to adoption. And the husband was like, no, we're going to keep on it. We're going to keep on it. He had the challenges. He felt confident they were they were going to overcome this.
Hmm.
And so as we sat and talked, she was sharing very openly her exhaustion with this and the toll it was taking on her body, on her emotional health. And she was just ready to be a mom, and just felt like he was not ready to be a dad. He felt that, he wanted to be a dad, but it was going to be biological at any cost. And as we talked more about it, it had to do with the fact that he was an only child of this very strong Greek family. And for him, it was incredibly important that this child be biological. And so, in talking through this, he started to realize and understand that no, it wasn't necessarily the attempted infertility that was, I mean, at fertility treatments, it was keeping him from moving forward. It was this deeper um, belief that he needed basically a physical heir. And as we talked through it, he started to realize, wait a minute, what's important here? What's important is that we together have a child. And however that child comes to us, it really, like I say, just in having these conversations, he was able to kind of get out something that he then realized was really holding them back because they had done years of fertility treatments.
Mhm.
So, getting on the same page sometimes comes with talking through those deeper emotional issues just to get to the core of what they are.
Mhm.
And in that too, I think one of those emotional blocks can be, you mentioned fear earlier, Kim, fear about the ongoing contact with the birth family. That, I think many parents might be scared that it won't feel like it's our baby, or we don't want to share. I know we've both heard comments like that. And I believe that's really indicative of an opportunity for education. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people come to adoption believing that open adoption looks a certain way. And I think that once they learn more about what the ongoing contact looks like, about a birth mother's, um, how she makes her decisions, how in this day and age it's easier for her to parent than place for adoption. That's the harder choice. And I think that, if a couple is stuck in that fear of open adoption, that's a place that you don't have to necessarily do that deep work on your own. Reach out to an adoption agency to learn more about that.
Absolutely. And you can email us to
Hmm.
get some access to some resources on open
Yeah,
adoption so you can be more informed and hopefully feel very comfortable with the
yeah.
concept and understand the benefits to the child too.
Right. And just as a quick note, if anybody ever wants to email us, ask a question, suggest a topic, you can go to letstalkadoption.com. We have a form there you can fill out. Even if you want to suggest a guest, we'd love to hear from you.
I want to take a moment to share something really meaningful, especially for those of you walking through the journey of adoption or supporting someone who is. It's called the Adoption Prayer Bracelet, and it's more than just a thoughtful piece of jewelry. It's a way to stay centered and intentional in prayer, whether you're hoping to adopt, supporting someone who is, or simply lifting up adoption in your daily life. I've given them as gifts and I've worn one myself. They're a gentle reminder to lift up birth parents, adoptive families, and the children at the heart of it all. You can learn more or order one at adoptionprayerbracelet.com. So, this is something that we've seen a lot through the years. I've seen this pop up before a family would actively begin adopting.
Hmm.
And you've also seen it, Heather, where, like in some of the stories you've described, they're not on the same page even after they have invested time, money,
Hmm.
emotion, home study. They've done the steps. They've swam through the tedium that is becoming adoption ready, only to find they're not both 100% on the same page. And that's a challenge for couples.
Hmm. Absolutely. And that is, like I say, often it's twofold. Number one, being on the same page with not just adopting, but also what your preferences are in adoption. What are the types of adoption you're looking at? Um, the types you're going to pursue, as well as, um, you know, really understanding that you're ready to become parents. you may have to kind of let go, even if it's temporarily, let go of the dream of pregnancy and then grasp on to the dream of, parenting through adoption. So there can be a lot of different elements that go into play about being on the same page. And again, like I say, a lot of it comes down to education and talking so that you're both operating from a place of knowledge, not of fear or assumptions.
Hmm. Yes, fear and assumptions actually, those I've seen how limiting that can be for families. So I think education really helps. Being
Yeah.
open to asking questions and being open to really receiving the response, receiving the answer and sitting with the answer and absorbing it
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
not reacting right away to the
Hmm.
answer.
Hmm.
And coming to, acceptance as well and kind of how things work in adoption. Another thing, Heather, is how do you as a couple handle big decisions together? Do you support each other? Do you clash? What does that look like? Because that's going to be a big part of having that successful partnership when it comes to
Hmm.
adopting and also parenting.
Hmm. Absolutely. Because there's going to be, you mentioned it briefly earlier. In adoption, no matter how you pursue adoption, there is going to be some loss of control. It's just how adoption works. And so, how you handle that, how you handle, like Kim said, big decisions, um, those are going to be opportunities for growth if it's not an area you're naturally in tune with, or if you're already there, then that's awesome. That's great. Um, and certainly there are big decisions in adoption, no matter how you pursue it. Another area that often most people aren't really in line with yet before they start is about your family. Are they supportive? And maybe they are. Most families are very supportive of adoption,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
they often need that education piece. A
Yes.
lot of them, especially when we're looking at parents and grandparents, they have a knowledge and understanding of adoption that is from the 50s. Even if, your parents are in their 40s, they probably, if they haven't been exposed to adoption much, they probably believe it is much like it was in the 50s, just because for some reason this is one area that, their adoption isn't talked about as much anymore. So you may have to educate them too. You may have to explain to them the benefits of open adoption. And even if, they say, well, that can't be good for the child. Okay. But this is what current research shows.
Mhm.
And if for people adopting domestically today, they need to be prepared for open adoption. And if they're not, then they need to, pursue other avenues such as, international or waiting children. That's just how it is. And actually, even with waiting children, there is really more and more talk about keeping those connections with birth families.
Mhm.
Certainly, it's case by case, and it has to do with safety, both physical and emotional. But there is I'm going to say a kind of bigger trend right now to ensure that those connections are still preserved in some way. So it again really gets back to education.
Mhm. Yes, and if you announce to your family that you're considering or planning to adopt and their first reaction isn't ideal, give them time. Maybe they
Hmm.
have some hangups and assumptions and fears,
Hmm.
and maybe some education will help and be patient with them. They may not have been aware of your path up to this point.
Hmm.
They may feel like this is a drastic decision, and they may feel like you don't know what you're getting yourselves into. Your life is so good. Why would you bring someone else's child into it and it could disrupt your whole life? That is sometimes the response that parents get from family members that don't really understand the true nature of adoption and how mostly it's newborns.
Mhm.
That,
And
yeah.
and also you may hear something or get a feeling like, oh, you're giving up, meaning you're
Hmm.
giving up on conceiving a baby naturally. And you know, I had a very personal experience like this, Kim, that was a little different. But when I was pregnant with my first child, I did, the pregnancy, the classes, childbirth classes, and the teacher was a nurse there at the hospital, and I ended up having to have a C-section. And when she came in to see me in the hospital, she said, "How?" Obviously, she didn't look at my chart. "How are you doing? How was the delivery?" And I said, "Oh, I had a C-section." And her face literally fell. "Oh, I'm so sorry." And and that was just like a punch in the gut. It's like, wait, we're all healthy and we're all happy and we're fine. She, I guess, was sorry that I didn't go through childbirth like
Like,
she educated us
right.
on. But it's like, so it's the same with your family. If your family says, "Oh, you're giving up." No, you're not giving up. You're broadening the opportunity for yourself to become parents.
Mhm.
So just know that, the reactions you get often, like we say, they come from a good heart, but they may not always feel like they are educated or supportive.
And you have worked through a lot before you're typically announcing this to
Yeah,
family, and
right.
they haven't. So
Yeah.
when you come into the conversation, you may be expecting excitement,
Hmm.
but it's good to have no expectation and be patient and have grace for where they are in that moment where they might
Hmm.
be a little more reactive. And maybe it can be multiple conversations, and maybe you can
Right.
provide them with some resources as to how to best support you and what modern adoption really looks like.
Right. So let's talk just for a minute about that practical readiness.
Hmm.
Have you explored and budgeted for the adoption process? That's one area that I think a lot of couples come into, especially if they have done fertility treatments, a little surprised that adoption has associated costs. I think a lot of people think that it's free or low cost, and certainly there are free and low cost ways to adopt if you are open to pursuing waiting older children in the system. Definitely. So this is an area to learn a little more about. Learn about the help out there for adopting a child, both the adoption tax credit, which I know we talked about a few weeks ago, and some of the other grants and different programs. But you do have to realistically budget for adoption, and it's good to learn more about the costs and what they potentially could be.
As well as understanding that the child's schedule is not, what am I trying to say, Heather? This timing of your adoption
Yes,
may conflict with other things you have scheduled, and you have to be willing to drop the other things you have scheduled
that's right.
to prioritize the adoption.
That's right.
So now your adoption agency probably has really good tips and pointers for how to go about this. It's
Hmm.
not that you stop living your life, but
Hmm.
you have to be ready that in this brief chapter of your life, adoption is your focus. It's your
Hmm.
priority. In order for this to come to fruition successfully, adoption has to be the focus. That is a common theme for successful adoptive couples and a common barrier for couples that just don't make it through the adoption journey.
Hmm. And definitely there's going to be appointments, meeting with a social worker. There's going to be travel, unless you are adopting very locally, which is kind of uncommon. If you're adopting from another state, there will be a wait after your child is born until you can travel home of anywhere from 10 days to possibly even 3 weeks. If you're adopting internationally, obviously there's going to be even more travel. So you have to ensure that you have that flexibility. I do want to put one little caveat in here because often I know our military families,
Mhm.
they will, instantly think, oh, we have deployments, we have this and that. You know, military families can definitely adopt successfully, even through things like deployments, even through, moving pretty frequently. So don't let that stop you either. Just know that not only do you have to have some flexibility with adoption, but if you have commitments like those that come with serving our country, there is some flexibility built into adoption for you.
And you may find some unexpected flexibility with your command. So, we
Hmm.
always advise military families to alert their command of the nature of the adoption and how you can get chosen at any moment. You might need to travel. And sometimes you can't get out of an exercise or a deployment or something like, or duty, whatever you've got
Hmm.
scheduled. It legally requires your presence, right? But if your command is aware, usually they're very supportive. So have good communication with your adoption
Hmm.
professional about your status and your
Hmm.
upcoming deployments, and have good communication with your command. I know they will really, really appreciate it too. And it gives them the opportunity to support you. And I've spoken with so many families, a lot of military families over the years, that were shocked to find that in their command, there were multiple people touched by adoption.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, probably kind of the last practical aspect here is understanding there's an adoption wait. You really have to understand that adoption doesn't happen quickly. Even if you're looking to adopt a waiting child, that is not a quick process. So, just like it takes 9 months to grow a baby biologically, it likely will take 9 months plus to adopt a child. It just is the nature. And, Kim, you made a great point about, for this short period in your life, adoption needs to be the focus, but it's not the sole focus. And I think when you said that, you meant you need to be sure you're doing what you're doing,
Hmm.
but then there often comes a wait. And as long as you're keeping up with, say, your background clearances and those important things, live your life. It's very important to not put life on hold. So you kind of have to go in with realistic expectations. And realistic expectations are that there's going to be a wait and that's going to be out of your control, no matter how you adopt.
Hmm. And we have talked in many programs previously about how to get through the wait.
Hmm.
Maybe that'll be a future topic.
Yeah,
Let me write that down.
absolutely. So, I want to talk just real quickly about certain motivations to adopt that sometimes can be red flags. One that we hear a lot is, I want to save a child. And I will just say that is absolutely wonderful. It can set you up for unrealistic expectations. And also, if that is your goal, then you may be encouraged to pursue paths to adoption that uh, more suit that. Now, I'm going to say, honestly, I don't think anyone should go into adoption to save a child. You're not saving a child. Certainly, I think a wonderful motivation is that you want to provide a loving home, a loving family, support for a child. And the children who really need that type of commitment are the ones who are waiting to be adopted. You can learn more about those kids at adoptuskids.org. You can see those waiting children. And if your motivation really is to go beyond yourself and do that's amazing. But again, you have to have realistic expectations. You may have a child in your home that is not real thrilled to be there. You can't expect a child to thank you for this. There's a lot about kind of savior complex out there right now in adoption. So it really is, you have to go in ready to make a commitment and knowing that it's not, it's going to be tough. These children have been through complex traumas, and you need to go in educated, um, and you need to go in ready to make that commitment.
Hmm.
Another one is marital troubles. I know, Kim, we both talked to families in the past who, they don't necessarily bring up that they're having struggles in their marriage, but you talk to a couple, you can sometimes get a sense that there's something bubbling under the surface. And certainly, whether it's having a biological baby or adopting a child, neither fix troubled marriages. Um, if anything, it will take those cracks in the relationship and turn them into chasms. It just adds stress and sleeplessness and frustrations on top of a foundation that's not solid. So, don't come into adoption thinking it's going to fix something that's wrong. Fix what's wrong through counseling, through some honest conversations first, please.
Yes, I recently talked with a couple who said they took a couple of years to work on the marriage and now feel like they're in the best place to actively pursue adoption. And I really admire that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another is, and we talked, I think, at length about this, and that is about healing from loss. You know, that loss of the dream, loss of being pregnant, that is something that you can take time and counseling to grieve. That's a real loss. It's something you probably took for granted would happen, that you would have a biological baby, you would experience pregnancy, and it hasn't happened. Again, take that time, have those conversations, and grieve the loss so you can move on whole and healed, and knowing that you may go through the rest of your life a little sad that that didn't happen, but adoption isn't a replacement for that. Adoption is another path to parenthood. And
And that
go ahead.
healing is so important because there can be obstacles in adoption. So if you're barely hanging on because you haven't taken the time to grieve and heal, and this ties into adoption solving problems. Adoption isn't a solution for something, but if you haven't healed and you feel like finally a birth mom picked us, next week we get our baby, and then she chooses to parent that baby, you're going to be doubly devastated at that point
Right.
because you didn't come from a whole place to begin with.
Right.
And when we're not healed, we're not in the best position necessarily to support others. We need
Hmm.
to address our own healing first.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is when you come into adoption, you may find yourself in a place you never thought you would be, which is supporting the birth mom, encouraging
Right.
her, loving her, wrapping your arms around her. When at first maybe you thought everyone's going to wrap their arms around me because I'm the one that has been going
Hmm.
through this. And suddenly you find yourself in a position where the script has been flipped and you really need to be healed in order to move through that in a loving and gracious way with birth mom too.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Kim. And then, lastly, really be sure you're doing this because you want to. We've talked about being on the same page with your partner. You want to, not because someone told you that you should, not because, as Kim mentioned earlier, you got engaged, you got married, now it's time to have the baby. No, this needs to be a decision and a choice that you want to do. And that can really sometimes take some time and sometimes time away, realizing that uh, it's okay to have that open conversation about, you know, this didn't happen. Pregnancy didn't happen naturally how we thought it would. Do we want to start another journey toward adoption? And, that kind of takes us to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the healthy motivation, healthy mindset. And that is you see adoption as a way to grow your family. It's not second best. I understand that a lot of parents come to adoption because of infertility, but it it is its own journey. I remember Kim, a family I worked with who was frustrated that the wait was not as quick as they thought it was going to be. And they said to me, you know, with some gusto, we've been waiting for 6 years to adopt. And I'm looking at their adoption file thinking, no, no, you haven't been waiting 6 years. And I mentioned, what have you been doing those 6 years? Because it wasn't anything I knew about. Well, they took it back to when they started fertility treatments. They
Mhm.
started fertility treatments 6 years ago. And then they went through those for a few years. Then they took some time to figure out what they wanted to do. Then they started adoption. So now here we are, 6 years from when they started trying to conceive, and they've been waiting for a baby for 6 years. You haven't been in the adoption journey for 6 years. Again, you have to separate those things. You have to
Mhm.
understand that adoption is another way to grow a family. It's not second best.
Mhm.
I think another really healthy mindset is the understanding and knowledge that you're open to learning and honoring your child's culture, their history, and their birth family. You know,
Mhm.
if you adopt a child um, internationally, it's easy because you know the country you're going to. You know what their culture and that cultural history is going to be, and it's easy. Domestically, waiting child, you're going to have some more information. You may adopt a child that you don't 100% know that. I have friends who adopted, and uh, their child is, in his 30s now. He was adopted through foster care. They got him when he was a few days old, and they uh, did a DNA test here about 5 years ago. Well, he did it because he was, an adult, to determine what his race was. They assumed he was half African American and half Hispanic, and they they assumed that's how they got their information all through his life. It was just assumption because he had been abandoned. They had no idea what either of his parents were, and it wasn't until DNA testing was easier that he could actually go and discover what his cultural heritage actually was. So for you, you may adopt a child not knowing or
But wait,
having
Heather, what was it? I can't be the only one wondering. We're a little invested here. Do you remember what his
his
result was?
I do. His mother was African American, and the father was, gosh, it was not Hispanic. I believe it was Caribbean. It was something I can't
Uh-huh.
remember exactly because
Something
how the DNA
unexpected.
test it,
Mhm.
but it was unexpected, especially based on where he was born. It was like, wait, what?
How?
It just
Right.
didn't make a lot of sense.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, it is you may not know. You just may not know. And as far as honoring the birth family, that may mean honoring their wishes for contact. And again, it's an opportunity to learn about that. And really I can't stress the value of education, because when a child grows up knowing who they are and where they came from, it's a much healthier place to be. Another healthy motivation and mindset is that you're willing to adjust your parenting if you have a child who has experienced loss or trauma. And that's really, I say that, but I think as a parent, you have to adjust your parenting for the needs of your child, even if they're biological. I mean, that's as a mother, every child is different. I believe every child needs to be parented different, and you just have to kind of be aware of that. And I think lastly is you realize that adoption is a journey. It's not a finish line. You you don't decide to adopt, and you're done. You are really adoptive parents for life, just like your parents for life. But because of the different things that play into adoption, you know, it is going to form not just who you are as a parent, but it's going to form your family, how they interact, really for the rest of life. And that can be a beautiful thing. You just need to know and understand that.
Mm. Well, Heather, I really appreciate all of the wisdom you've given us throughout this episode of the podcast. And I just want to leave us all with some ideas as to where do we go from here? How do you work on your adoption readiness? Well, there are lots of things you can do. We're certainly living in an age where you have so much information and access to people at your fingertips. I know you can contact an agency and say, hey, do you have an info meeting? Is there a webinar we can listen to? Is there an info packet we can get so that we can learn about the process? And I would say, don't just target one agency. Maybe have 2 or 3 agencies that you're in communication with so you can see some differences between how different organizations work and what their models are, and really become educated and aware of your options so you can feel super content and empowered as you walk through that partnership once you've made that commitment to work together toward your adoption. Another thing you can do right now is to actually just take a pen and paper, write down your biggest fears and hopes, and share them with your spouse. If you're a married couple, talk through these together and give each other grace and space and have patience. And be prepared that some of the things your spouse might say or some of the things that might land on that piece of paper might be unexpected, and that's okay. It's good to do this work ahead of time. The work you put in is such a valuable investment in the stability of the partnership in adoption going forward with each other as a couple, and also just being healed and whole and stable and strong as you partner with an agency and partner with a birth mom, and then enter into one of the best chapters of life, which is becoming parents. And if something feels like a deal breaker to you right now, be honest about it before starting. A deal breaker could be, well, I'll only adopt if the baby is my same race, or I'll only adopt if XYZ, if the birth mom doesn't want contact. Educate yourself. Don't let those deal breakers become um, obstacles that limit you and really cripple your ability to be successful. So if something feels like a deal breaker, kind of dissect that a little. Find out, is there some information I need? Is there some time I need to go through some healing? Well, where is this deal breaker coming from? Is it simply coming from the fact that I've been walking on a path where things feel out of control? Even my own body feels like it's betraying me, and I feel a failure month after month. And so I'm going to put my foot down. And if I'm going to adopt, it has to be this certain way. Work through that, because you want to come into adoption healed and whole and strong and ready. And so I think that that is such a good suggestion. Identify deal breakers and just really be honest. Sometimes deal breakers really are deal breakers. So not every deal breaker is something that can be remedied with education. But it's good to be honest about that with yourself and with each other before you get started. And adoption is so beautiful, but it's not the only way to live out love and compassion. And the Bible says to help the orphans. Adopting isn't the only way. You can still be instrumental in the life of an orphan, by supporting an orphanage, by supporting children in need, by supporting other couples who really truly are called to adopt. There are many ways that you can live out love and compassion. And it's okay to slow down, ask questions, and even change your mind. It's okay to take a pause and just not pursue anything for a little while, especially because for many couples, they've been on the path of life that is going 100 miles per hour ever since they were in high school, to the next step, to the next step, to marriage, to buying a house, to career, and finally are ready to forge ahead into parenting. but it's okay to take a moment to just slow down and ask questions and sit with information and sit with your true feelings and even change your mind about some things. And we're here to walk you through the process, whether you're ready now or you need more time. And we've worked with couples over the years that 3 years ago, they filled out an inquiry, they filled out an application, they have an adoption phone conference appointment with us and decide that they're just not ready right now. And that's okay. And then they come back and they are fully ready, they're fully accepting, they're fully surrendered, and they're prepared, and they've worked through so much. And they are going to make great partners in adoption and a great support to a birth mom and really wonderful parents through adoption to a child. And your readiness really matters because the child's future matters. So thank you for tuning in to today's Let's Talk Adoption podcast, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.